So, why is it even important to care about the existence of God? Why should I care that God exists?
Okay. So as we're getting into this conversation, something really important to pay attention to is that this is a conversation. The more questions you ask, the better the answer comes.
Okay.
Right. So which is why it's like you got to ask more questions as we go through this to kind of clarify. So this is kind of like trying to describe and discuss something you can't see. It exists, but to get an understanding of what this is, why it's important, the more you ask about it, the more you'll understand. So, for example, a person has never seen an elephant. If you had to describe an elephant in one sentence to someone who's never seen one, it's next to impossible. So what do? You describe it piece by piece, and then you start putting it together, and you put it together, and you put it together. So same way when it comes to philosophical questions that, for example, I can't see real life in, I need to kind of go through and have discussion around it and open it up for conversation. So it's going to be something we can go back and forth on, right? So why does it even matter that God exists? Comes back to the idea that do I have a purpose of existence? And this is where we struggle with the idea that yeah, there are my day-to-day needs, but do I actually serve a higher purpose? Is there more that I need to do with my life than just simply survive on a day-to-day basis? And that's where the conversation comes in that does God exist? Because if God exists, that means that there is a creator, and a creator who is intelligent, who has created me with intelligence, has a purpose for creating me. So for me to come to that conclusion that why is it important that God exists, it means that I have purpose in life. I can do something, I need to do something with my life. And therefore, it's like knowing that I have a purpose is really important as opposed to just simply eat, sleep, and die. And that's what we want to find out is that was I just born to, and this is a common conversation, like what, are we just supposed to eat, sleep, and die? Or are we just supposed to, just consume and then leave this world? Do we actually serve a higher purpose? And this concept of a higher purpose is one of those central conversations that causes depression in people because if they don't find a higher purpose in their life, like, what am I doing this for? Why am I going through this process? Is it just to procreate and live on?
So, how do we find out if we have a higher purpose? Like, how do we go about, searching for that higher purpose? So, if God exists, He made me. Did He make me for a higher purpose? Now that I'm thinking about Him making me for a higher purpose, how do I find out what my higher purpose is?
So this is why this entire train of thought and question is what we're going to try and answer. So the first thing is why is this an important question?
Hmm.
It's an important question because it gives me purpose in life. It gives me a reason to exist rather than simply what my natural function is of eat, sleep, and die. Eat, sleep, procreate, and die, really. And that's why this is an important question. And which is why the first part of this question is then to kind of go into the idea that how do I know God exists,
Hmm.
right? So even before that, right, one of the important elements to understand is that what are the attributes of that creator? The attribute of that creator is that he has to be intelligent. So if the creator is intelligent, that means that the same way I don't do anything without a purpose. There's nothing I do except that it has reason and purpose. Even when I want to waste time, I'm doing it on purpose. I have a goal behind it. So if I have the ability to have intention in every action that I do, then the one who brought me into existence must have intention in every action that they do. So, and this is where the conversation comes in of talking about that. Okay, fine. Now, how do I make sure that I actually was created or that God is there?
So, God is the intelligent creator. How do I become intelligent to figure out my purpose?
Well, I mean, thinking is part of it, asking the right questions and studying and pondering. So stop looking just for fun and start thinking about what's my purpose in action and be intellectual about the process.
So, how do I know that God's actually there?
Well, and this is okay, fine. This is where we start getting into a serious conversation about knowing the existence of God. When we talk about knowing the existence of God, there isn't one proof to it, there are many, right? Some of the most basic proofs are look at the world and you'll see that signs that God exists. Very true, but maybe I don't have the complexity to get to that concept that looking at the world itself makes me believe that God exists. Because there are very intelligent people who look at the world just like us. They don't believe God exists. So how do I come to that conclusion? How do I get to that process? This entire discussion about the existence of God and how do I know God exists, there are macro level views of this conversation, and then there are micro level views of this conversation. Let me explain. Macro level is looking outside of myself and looking at reality as it's present and coming to the conclusion that it serves a purpose and it came into existence. And micro level is looking down within myself and looking down at the small things and realizing the complexity of those items insists that there's an intelligent design behind it. The most common discussion, first and foremost, about whether God exists or not is to say that, well, evolution is sufficient to present that evolution is not God and that's how we came into existence. We just evolved into existence. But there's a lot of problems with the theory of evolution. To name a few. First off, Darwinian evolution, when it was laid out, Darwin didn't know about the human cells the way we do. Darwin's theory of evolution was basically like everything is made up of cells, which are kind of like pieces of Play-Doh. And these pieces of Play-Doh change their form to whatever's the most convenient and beneficial thing for it to be done. And this was his understanding. Today, what we know about cells and how specific they are and how RNA, DNA, mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, all these things interact together. We know that one cell that's, for example, in the liver can't suddenly go and work in the brain because the brain needs more. You know, you can't take, for example, a cell for your stomach and put it inside of your nose and change your nose. That there's such a deep complexity that if he would have known this complexity about cells, even he would have said that, no, evolution, that all things were one and they changed into different formats. He would have said that's impossible.
So it negates his initial thought process.
Knowing what we know today. However, there are other problems with it. For example, evolutionary process does not indicate how life began. How did inorganic matter become organic matter? Evolution doesn't answer this. There's wild theories about it that all point to other places and other things that go on, but nothing actually comes to a conclusion that says, how did this happen? Further to that, we know the timeline of the existence of the earth and the complexity of life as it exists. These two are incompatible, meaning that the timeline of the earth and when organic matter shows up and when life begins and the complexity of life and the complexity of humanity, the timeline doesn't fit. Meaning there's no linear progression that shows and says, okay, fine, this is when one-celled one-celled organisms became multi-cell organisms, and then multi-cell became specialized multi-cell, then it became this, and then it became that. That entire progression doesn't quite fit in the timeline of the life that we exist in. So there's these gaps, and that's why we look for things called missing links that demonstrate and show how one thing became another. Even, for example, in the history of human beings and how we take a look at our predecessors on this earth. The problem is that predecessor, how does it make the logical jump into a Homo sapien because of the change in the size of the brain? We don't know how that happens, meaning that to believe in this theory of evolution, I have to take a lot of gaps in this process and it's inconsistent. Versus the idea, the counterpoint to it is the belief in a creator, intelligent design. And we see that science has proven to us the presence of a creator, and there are actually really great books written on this. Eric Metaxas writes a book called Atheism Doesn't Exist. And essentially what he does is he goes through and he gives an analysis of everything we know about science today, proves that there is intelligent design. For example, the distance of the Earth to the sun, the distance of the sun from the central Big Bang, where the life, supposedly begins and splits apart. The fact of how sunlight specifically has the ability to pass through water, but not through other substances, to be able to nurture and grow life in places. That how unique these relationships are point to the fact that someone had to structure it this way, and had they not structured it this way, life couldn't exist. Another reality is talking about the idea that everything that we know exists in a cause and effect relationship. If there is a cause for something, it's also the effect of something else. For example, there are many causes that brought us into these chairs today. The creation of this chair, these cameras, our clothes, all of this equipment that we went through to bring us to the fact that you and I are sitting in this exact location today. And all those causes that brought us here, there were other causes before them. And this chain of cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect, where does it begin? That point where it begins is a point of debate and discussion. So either one, it can be that there was always cause and effect, but that would imply that there's no starting point for anything, and it's just constantly things are moving and moving and moving and moving and moving and moving, and there's no purpose to anything. It's just going to constantly be moving, and you're moving along with it. Or two, there is a cause that was the initial cause for every effect that took after it. For that initial cause, then, it can't be like every other cause because every other cause is an effect.
Yeah.
So that initial cause has to be what we call an absolute. And every other effect that comes after it is relative. meaning that it's relative to something coming before it. But if we want to talk about the point of origination, that point of origination has to be absolute, meaning that point of origination can't have something before it. For that initial cause to have nothing before it, it can't be like anything else. It has to be different. That initial cause that initiates all of this process cannot have the attributes of anything else. So this is how we kind of bring this discussion into a philosophical perspective, right? Is that everything that exists in this world has three attributes.
Okay.
It has time, it takes up space, it's made of material. So meaning that there's a time where it is and a time where it isn't, right? There's a point where it comes into existence and before that it didn't exist. 2, it exists in a space. There's some place where I am and there is some place where I'm not. And 3, there is something I'm made of and there's something I'm not made of.
Okay.
These attributes describe everything that exists. And for something to exist, it has to have something that brings it into existence that gives it time, space, and matter. So that means that the initial cause cannot have time, cannot have space, cannot have matter. Because that would mean that something then was preceding it. So going back to that initial cause that brings about all this chain of cause and effect can't be like anything that comes after it. And this is where we start coming into the description that God has to exist that began this entire process that goes on and on and on. And that's why to understand God, you can't think of him in time, space, and matter because those are effects. And you can't have something that is in effect be the original cause of everything that comes into existence. If you can get this concept, you start realizing a few really interesting things. That there are some things that are bad questions. Have you ever heard someone ask you, like, can God make a rock so big that he can't lift it?
Yeah.
What's wrong with that question?
If God's making the rock, why wouldn't you be able to lift it?
But that would mean that if he can't make a rock that big, that means that God is not all powerful, right?
Yeah.
What's wrong with the question?
Limiting God.
It's measuring God in time, space, and material.
Yeah.
So that's it. God exists outside of time, space, and material. So anything that's measured in time, space, and material can't be something that equivocates to God.
So now you're confining him.
And once you confine him, he's no
longer God. So if one aspect of the macro views is cause and effect, then how do we determine what the micro views are?
Okay.
Or what they consist of?
Okay. And which is why sometimes someone thinking about this big picture can come to the conclusion that God exists. Sometimes you, like I said, you need to look at like the smaller picture, right?
Okay.
And that's where we start talking about harmony in creation. Let me explain what that means. Everything that exists has the same building blocks of atoms.
Okay.
Meaning, like, if I'm a creator, I'm going to make everything on one harmonious system that operates together. And the use of that harmonious system is I can identify everything that exists within that system. So, for example, and this is something really cool, right? Because I know how elements operate. Today, we can take a microscope or a telescope and these giant telescopes and look out way to the other side of the universe and determine, based upon the attributes that we're seeing, what is it made of, right? So they have these planets. They've never seen it, but they say it rains diamonds on that planet.
Yeah, that's the new one that they just
how did that happen?
spoke about.
How did that happen? That happened because when I look at the fundamental building blocks, they're the same across everything that exists. The same way, for example, when we look at the complexity of life, if it was something that naturally occurs or something that just spontaneously began, complexity would be kind of reserved to one location of that wave, not universally across it in differentiation.
Yeah.
What that means to say is a fly is not like, it's like, for example, it's just an empty little thing that buzzes around. No, it has organs. It has tools within it that are exactly precise to its size and to its shape. And it follows a science that is unlike anything else. And it's unique, meaning that the chemistry and the orchestra of a fly being able to take wing and fly away in different directions is completely different than how a bee operates and how a bee flies and how it functions. And in the same way, the fact that I can uniquely identify all of the elements down to their most basic attributes and come to the conclusion that this exists and this is what it's made of, and that it has electrons in it, it has protons in it, and then under that it has quarks under it, and it has this under it, shows that there's a complexity to how this was put together and there's intelligent design. Otherwise, it would be irrepeatable. Right? So one of the examples that I love giving kids is, right, When I plant an apple seed, do I ever get a duck?
Depends where you
The
plant
amount of
it.
time that you have to think about this
Depends where you
really
plant it.
disturbs me. It really disturbs me. Little kids immediately, you say, "Can I plant an apple seed and get a duck?" And I say, "No, you can't." What do you get when you plant an apple seed? You get an apple
A
tree.
duck tree.
See, but you get an apple tree. The
Yeah.
consistency, right? There's no randomness in it. If this was a random creation, the conclusion of every action every time should be something different. What people made a mistake with is that they looked at this order and they said that Mother Nature is God.
Mm.
Mother Nature is simply the name that we've given to the order that exists and the laws that exist that give us consistently replicable results out in the world. Right? So when for example, I take a seed, I plant it, I water it, I give it nutrients, it produces a tree, and the tree always has the same attribute. I said, Mother Nature is beautiful. Mother Nature is the law that allowed for that system to exist. It itself is not intelligent. It's a sign of intelligence existing.
Yeah.
Because there's consistency in approach. That's one of the micro views of seeing consistency in everything that exists, that from its most fundamental building blocks up to its most giant object, I can give it attributes and I can understand its existence because there's an organization there, there's consistency there, there's process there.
Yeah, because if Mother Nature was God and you planted an apple seed and it knows people need bananas or like oranges, it would automatically do it would do that, right?
I'm so concerned for your health and safety right now.
No, you don't have to put that part in.
You got,
I was do you get
you
what
were
I'm trying to say?
spitballing, yeah.
Yeah.
You were saying that it should be able to change that
If
process
it's
based
God,
upon the
it
need.
should be able to change the process.
But the truth of it is, right, is the fact that it is God is that it gave us the system of recognizing how to manipulate the system. It set rules. And that idea that rules exist tells us that a rule maker has to exist, right? So, for example, this is like a famous story of a debate between the atheist and A.B.A.S. So, a very famous Greek theologian who was an atheist was traveling around to different places, and he comes to the Persian Empire. And he goes to the court of the king, and he says, "I'm, a Greek theologian. I'm famous. I've defeated every theist that's come. I want to debate your top theist." So the king says, "Okay, fine. Go find Hilli, and bring him." And they go and they visit Alama Hilli, who was visiting a village at that time, and they say, "Hey, the king has invited you to a debate. Would you come to the debate?" And Alama Hilli says, "Sure, I'll be there Friday night at 8 p.m." So message comes back to the king. The king, hearing that Alama Hilli, the most famous theologian of the time in that place, will debate the most famous atheist theologian of the time, sets it in his court.
Yeah, the party.
Invites everybody. And sure enough, 8 o'clock comes, court's full of people, atheist is sitting there, Alama Hilli doesn't show up. 8:30, 9 o'clock, 9:30, like 10 o'clock, he just rolls in. And the atheist turns to the king. He says, "This guy's disrespecting me. Why did he show up late?" So the king turns and he says, "Hilli, why'd you come late?" And Alama Hilli replies, he says, "Well, you see, for me to get here, I had to cross a river. And there was no boat there. So I waited." He says, "Eventually, a tree fell in the water, and the tree broke up into the shape of a boat. And then I climbed into the boat, and the boat took me across the river." And the atheist says, "That's so disrespectful." And he says, "What do you mean it's disrespectful?" He says, "You expect me to believe that a boat came into existence out of nowhere, and that's why you're late, is that you were waiting for the boat to be finished being created? Just tell me you were late." Alama Hilli smiles and he says, "Oh, atheist, you have a hard time believing that a boat could come into existence on its own, but you want me to accept and believe that the entirety of the universe came into existence on its own?" And that was the end of the debate. The reality, right, is that consequentially, when I look at something small that's in front of me, like somebody puts a chair in front of me, somebody puts a cell phone in front of me, and expects me to believe that it came into existence on its own, I can't, because I can comprehend the process by which this item came into existence. And I know that the complexity within it had to be engineered.
Yeah.
But when it comes to, for example, the world and the universe, where we go wrong is we have a hard time with the idea that something so big and complex, there could be someone who brought it into existence. So we say, no. Since I can't imagine it, there can't be an intelligent creator. And that's where we're looking at the micro view and understanding that if little things require a creator, how could it be that big things don't require a creator? If I can identify the rules in something simple and they're universal, how could it be that there isn't someone who created this rule in this process? So, which is why sometimes looking at systems of cause and effects and understanding the philosophy of things coming into existence and needing an absolute to bring relative into creation and going through these conversations sometimes are amazing. They're great. But other times I need to look at something fundamentally simple. And this is where that conversation comes. Look at the world and you'll see that God exists. You're looking at this process, looking at this reality, and understanding intelligent design in creation.
So I believe in God. So why do I need to believe in religion?
It's a fun question, right? The natural reaction is, isn't it enough that I believe in God? I'm spiritual. I don't need to be religious.
Yeah, like why do I need religion if now I have a relationship with God and I can directly speak to God? I mean, obviously, not at least to me, he's not responding back. But for people, like they may think that, oh, if I have a relationship with God and I'm speaking to God with certain things that He does, it's like His answer to me or whatever. So why do I need religion if I can establish this relationship with God?
So this is again going back to that discussion around purpose. And there's a few different ways of answering this question, right? So when we talk about purpose, do I choose my purpose or does God choose my purpose?
If we have free will,
Well, if God created me,
well, yeah, then obviously,
then he created a purpose.
yes,
For me to
for me,
determine that
yeah.
purpose, he has to indicate to me what that purpose is.
Hmm.
Hence, concept of religion. It's a derived purpose. Right? It's a push to purpose. This is one aspect of the conversation where we can simply say is that if I come to the conclusion that there is a God and I have a purpose, then he has to tell me what that purpose is, and that purpose is given to me through religion. That's him communicating with me and giving me instruction. There's another conversation about it, because God's actions are not one elemented, or they're not one sided, they're multi sided, right? Which talks about the idea that let's take a look at the concept of a healthy person. A healthy person is not someone who does whatever they want.
They have a discipline.
They have a regimen, they have a process. You have to be particular about the things that you eat. You have to be particular about the process of your rest. You have to be particular about the process of every element of your life. How you exercise, how you rest, what you eat, what you don't eat, where you go, where you don't go. Going in certain places will cause you to die. So meaning that in all aspects of life, to be a successful human being, I have to be someone who follows a system and is careful and coordinated in the process that I take on.
Hmm.
The spirit is an element that exists within a human being. That spirit needs to be addressed too. The same way that I need to pay attention to the nutrition of my body and make sure that I put good foods in, it keeps my body healthy, so does the spirit. And the spirit, when it interacts with the body, both the spirit and the body need to be taken care of to keep this system working well. One element, there's two aspects of addressing this. One is to say, is that the same way that the body needs nutrition and I go through the process of learning my nutrition, so does the spirit. And religion is that construction of nutrition and process and ideology of helping and keeping the spirit healthy.
Okay.
Another aspect of discussion is religion is that user manual. Because religion doesn't just address the spirit, it addresses the body, which is why some things are forbidden from eating, some things are forbidden from doing, some places are forbidden from going. All these forbiddances and all these structures are there to kind of regiment a human being and give him the user manual that if you want to be successful, you want to fulfill your purpose, you want to do something good with this life, follow these instructions and you'll accomplish something. So that purpose of religion from a few different aspects, right? One is that it helps us control our soul and it gives us how do we regiment our soul? The same way we have to regiment our body, we need to regiment our soul, and that soul is going to do. This is going to do it for us. Two, the collection of both of this, the soul and the body, needs a structure to make sure that we fulfill our purpose. And that's where this user manual of religion comes in and gives every human being a user manual that, okay, fine, you're created. Congratulations. You exist. Here's all the things you need to do and all the things you need to stay away from. You want to be successful? Follow this. The same is true with a car, right? You go out and you buy a brand new car. Nice shiny red car. Salman in his red car. I know it's a blue car, but I'm, throwing people off of the path.
Well,
Anyway,
now they know.
Salman in his shiny red car. How long do you want to keep this car for? A week? A month? a year? No, you want to keep it for a long time. You want to get maximum benefit. I invested in it.
Yeah.
It's mine. I want to use it for its entirety and its entire benefit. What are you going to do? You're going to look at the owner's manual and you're going to realize that, okay, my car needs oil changes. My car needs its tires taken care of. My car needs its battery checked. My car needs all of these different things that it needs. It can't be too cold. It can't be too hot. It needs this type of fuel. It needs this type of... And what do? I look at the owner's manual, which is an instruction from the person who made the car, how to make sure that I get the maximum benefit out of the car. The same way for a human being, fine, Allah exists, the creator's there. I'm here. To get the maximum benefit out of what the creator's given me, I have to follow the owner's manual that he gives me, the instruction manual that he gives me. And that's what religion is. It's a way of regimenting and structuring our life so that we're successful and we take the maximum benefit of this life.
Can someone have multi-purpose, like in life? Like I know searching for your purpose in life is like, but can someone have more than one purpose in life? And how do you figure that out?
So, okay, I think that's a trick question. Let me explain why.
Okay.
There is an overarching purpose, and then there's paths to get there.
Okay.
Right. And this is where, for example, the way I explain it, the most easiest way, what the purpose of life is, go to heaven. It's your one purpose.
Okay.
Go to heaven. To get to heaven, I need to know who is God and I need to follow his instruction. And many of us who are born as theists, believing God, we know that God exists, and it's our job now to find our path to him. And the benefit and the purpose of that entire path and that entire discussion is that there's a reward waiting for me. And this is where we can get into a much deeper conversation about the reality that this world is not heaven. It was never meant to be heaven. It can't be heaven.
It's temporary.
It's temporary. We die. We suffer through it. There is no one who lives in this life except that they have some kind of problem. And the instruction and the reality of problems is heaven has to be a place without problems. And if God exists and he's promised me a reward, it has to be a perfect reward. So my entire purpose is go to heaven. Do I need to be a veterinarian to go to heaven?
Not necessarily.
Do I need to be, for example, a mathematician to go to heaven?
No.
So meaning that my purpose could be in life that I'm, for example, a humanitarian, or for example, I'm a mathematician, or I'm a veterinarian, or I'm a physician. And that's my purpose in life from one aspect, but it doesn't negate my overarching purpose. Which is why having multiple purposes or multiple goals that you want to accomplish in life is a beautiful thing. It's a great thing. But none of them compete with the overarching goal of go to heaven.
All right. So thank you, Sheikh Bilal, for that interesting conversation on if God exists or not and why I need God. I'm almost convinced. So inshallah, we'll continue these conversations and we'll help everyone get there. Thank you.